With the EU and China holding their first summit in 2 years, Brussels is pressing Beijing for assurances that it will neither supply Russia with arms nor help Moscow circumvent Western sanctions. President Xi Jinping is in a virtual meeting with top EU leaders Charles Michel and Ursula von der Leyen right now. And Lo Min joins us live from Shanghai. Min, what is the outcome China would want from these meetings?
China has so far quietly adhered to these sanctions against Russia, but there are no signs that they will abandon its strategic partnership with Russia so soon after the Chinese and Russian foreign ministers met just on Wednesday to reaffirm their commitment to deepen their bilateral ties. So what China wants is really to be able to define its own relationship with Russia in its own terms on a basis of win-win cooperation without that affecting its relationship with Europe. It wants the right to be able to implement an independent foreign policy without being forced to choose sides. Now, of course, the EU doesn't agree with this. It sees China's stance on Ukraine as having a direct impact on the European security situation. And for Europe, it's increasingly staying on the fence as this war drags into the second month. Now, China also wants the EU to retain strategic independence. And their definition for that is for the EU to not cooperate with the US, because we know Europe and NATO have both joined the US to issue a stern warning to Beijing that it would face strong consequences if it were to continue supporting Moscow. Now, the other thing that I think language-wise that would come out of this summit for China would be to have some sort of reference to China-EU cooperation on humanitarian aid efforts, as well as a promotion of dialogue on the Ukraine issue.
Women, of course, you talk about Ukraine, that's top of the agenda, but Ukraine is just part of a much larger issue, which you hinted at as well, which is China-EU relations, which have been less than ideal since at least 2019.
Yes, well, China definitely doesn't want this to become a one-issue summit. There are a slew of bilateral issues that China wants to talk about. Among them are the lifting of sanctions over alleged human rights abuse in Xinjiang. China expected to reiterate its position on Xinjiang and even welcoming EU leaders to visit that region. China also wants to restart trade negotiations on that EU-China trade deal that was put on hold. But this could only happen if sanctions are lifted. And of course, the Europeans would want to discuss Lithuania and get China to stop those economic coercion of the country after Lithuania recognized a de facto Taiwanese embassy in its capital. But all of these issues would likely take a back seat if China and the EU can't come to some sort of alignment on the Ukrainian issue. We also know that EU has surpassed ASEAN in the first 2 months of this year to become the largest trading partner of China. And so China wouldn't want Ukraine to drive a wedge between the two parties. And earlier at a foreign ministry press briefing, the spokesperson expressed hope that EU officials would meet China halfway.
And thanks for that analysis. Lo Min from Shanghai.
Well, let's stay at the summit, this time from Brussels, where Rosie Burchard joins us live. Rosie, how will Brussels convince Beijing to give it the assurances it's seeking over Russia?
Well, those top EU officials will certainly be doing their best to try and convince Beijing. First of all, they'll likely be making the moral case. They'll likely be raising arguments along the lines of, as two major world powers, the EU and China bear a responsibility to try and counter and de-escalate man-made crisis. They'll also likely be pointing out some what they might see as contradictions. They'll probably highlight to China that if China values territorial integrity and sovereignty, which they believe China does based on that one China policy, then surely it seems like a contradiction not to perhaps condemn in strong terms the violation of territorial integrity the EU says that Russian invasion of Ukraine so clearly represents. Then, on the other hand, they're likely to be making the business case, or what might otherwise be described as veiled threats. So talking about the impact perhaps on the Chinese economy and on prosperity, should there be any potential for kind of circumventing sanctions facilitated by China, or, of course, supply of weapons. That would be very bad for EU-China relations. The EU imported 472 billion euros worth of goods from China in 2021, so they are major business partners. And of course, they'll also be highlighting the reputational damage that China could suffer were they to be seen as aiding and abetting Russia as this crisis rumbles on and this conflict rages on in Ukraine. Of course, China says that it does too want peace. It does not favour any sort of escalation in Ukraine, but the two sides clearly have very different visions of how to unlock that peace and what the next steps should be.
And what else does the EU hope to come out of these meetings?
Well, I think the hopes on what might be kind of guaranteed or to come out of this meeting are quite low. That's because, as was previously mentioned, there have been a rocky road in EU-China relations for the past 2 years since this last summit. The two sides have been trading sanctions and counter-sanctions in 2021. The EU accused China of human rights violations. China then sanctioned EU officials and parliamentarians, accusing them of meddling in internal affairs. The EU will then probably also be bringing up Lithuania, a small EU Baltic nation, which is seen to be part of kind of now. The EU has taken that case to the World Trade Organization, saying China is using economic coercion against Lithuania. So a real case there of difficult relations, high stakes, but low expectations.
Many thanks, Rosie Burchard in Brussels.